I'm truly honored to be invited to give this keynote address. I must say, this is the largest audience I've ever addressed. I hope what I've prepared will have some resonance for the students assembled here today and respond to the theme of the conference, environmental sustainability and going green. I have been working over the past several days since I arrived in Bangalore to make my remarks shorter. When I arrived 2 days ago, this talk was twice as long. I think that part of my problem drafting this keynote address was similar to the problem that a young architect has when they begin to design their first building. In the profession of architecture, it takes so long to get to the point where you can finally make design decisions that you want to include every idea about architecture that you have ever had in your first building. So when I started in this talk, I tried to include every single idea I had about sustainability and architecture and leadership all in one talk. But instead of listing every idea I ever had, let me just tell you what I would like to talk about. 4 things. First, the state of the planet in terms of wealth and poverty, development, human health and welfare. Number 2, the reason why sustainability challenges are difficult and different than other problems, and why sustainability has to include social equity as part of its conception. Number 3, why a new kind of leadership is needed to address these issues, and what kind of solutions might get us started in the right direction. And finally, how to identify these leadership issues as you go out into the workforce and how to work on developing these leadership ideas in yourself. But before I go into these things, I wanted to briefly note an anniversary. It was 50 years ago, in December 1968, that the astronauts on the Apollo 8 mission saw something no one else had ever seen. A view of the Earth rising from behind the moon. The images on the screen are a reconstruction from the photos from the windows of the ship. The astronauts were slowly rotating the ship, focusing on survey mapping the lunar surface, when astronaut Bill Anders noticed the Earth rising outside his window. The quotes on the images are from the mission tape recordings. The astronauts were so focused on getting their work done and preparing for their work, they had not anticipated that they would see the Earth from this vantage point. The photograph that astronaut Anders took 50 years ago is now known as Earthrise, and one of the most profound images in world history. Distributed across the world, we saw ourselves for the first time from a new perspective. In the words of astrophysicist Neil Tyson, there are no countries in that image. There are no national boundaries or state borders. Suddenly, we were thinking of Earth as a system, Earth as a collective home for all humanity. Over the next decade, a profound cultural shift took place across the globe, part of the deep rethinking of our relationship with the planet. In America, in the 70s, it brought forth the first important environmental laws, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Academics and designers brought forth new ideas about designing our social and economic systems to be more in harmony with our conception of a finite planet. Although the general public was not yet aware of the threat of rising CO2 levels, although scientists were, events like photographing the Earth from space had a profound effect on the general public. So where are we today? Surely we have made some progress towards building a more sustainable planet and a more sustainable future. Although global inequities still persist on a vast scale, and the scourge of war and conflict and the growing impacts of climate change are causes of misery across the planet, over the past 100 years, significant progress has been made on many of the problems that came to wide awareness during the second half of the last century. This is exactly what was just discussed by the President of the Council of Architecture a few moments ago. Most importantly, global poverty has been reduced. There are fewer people living today in abject poverty than at any time since 1800. The vast majority of our 7 billion people plus population live well above the level of extreme poverty. Compared to 100 years ago, there has been great progress. The overall population growth, as you just saw in this slide, has slowed, represented by the red line, although the total population is anticipated to rise by 2 billion before 2050. Indicators for life expectancy, global health, and child mortality have improved, even if progress is uneven across parts of the planet. The maps we're about to show the reduction of child mortality in 20-year increments since 1880. The red symbolizes very high levels of mortality, but as we go through these images, more and more countries are orange and blue, representing that more children are surviving into adulthood. Even hunger, while still a problem in some parts of the world, are falling at rates never before seen. But what about global equity? We are challenged most to improve in this area of global equity and environmental improvement. Global income distribution over the last 200 years, as shown on this slide, has become more uniform as people have entered the middle class. As shown on this chart, the numbers of people are on the vertical axis, and the income levels are shown on a logarithmic scale in the horizontal axis. Wealth came first to the industrialized countries, and even in the 1970s, the middle slide, the middle image, the population of Asia, represented in red, was still lagging behind. But as you see in the lower slide, in the last 30 years, Asia has gone closer in terms of wealth, exactly as has been described earlier today. More recently, looking at 5-year intervals starting in 1988, more people are entering the middle class, especially in China, as they move across the slide. If you were a leader in one of the poorer regions, you would want to create wealth and move people out of poverty by investing in economic growth, manufacturing, industrialization, and trade. Underpinning all of this, you need energy. And that's where we come to carbon emissions. I'm sure you know how the planet is doing with carbon emissions. Not good. The next slide on the screen shows the rate of growth of carbon emissions exponentially within our lifetime. I don't need to go into the effects of rising carbon emissions with this audience. We all know the impacts and the threats of global warming. But if you look at this slide of emissions by region, it's no surprise. In places that have already achieved widespread wealth, emissions are stabilizing or decreasing. But places that need to catch up are contributing the most in terms of carbon. And in Asia, most of the emissions are coming from the burning of coal for electrical generation. In Europe and North America, coal plants are being retired in favor of natural gas plants or renewables. And we will see these trends play out in time over Asia. The problems are well known. The Indian government has already announced the ambition that by 2030, only electric cars will be sold in India, assuming the cost of electric cars continues to decline. And last week, India's government, the National Clean Air Program, unveiled a 5-year plan to reduce air pollution in cities by up to 30% from 2017 levels, a response to emissions from power plants and vehicles. But for the near future, we will continue to see rising emissions. Journalist Somni Sepgupta, writing in the New York Times last November, titled an article, "The World Needs to Quit Coal, so Why Is It So Hard?" The images on the screen are from that article. Ms. Sepgupta writes, "With renewables like solar and wind becoming more affordable, why is it so hard to move away from coal for energy generation? The reason is because coal is there. It's the incumbent energy source, millions of tons under the ground. Powerful companies backed by powerful governments, often in the form of subsidies, are in a rush to grow their markets. Banks still profit from it. National electricity grids were designed for coal generation. Coal plants can be a surefire way for politicians to deliver cheap energy and retain power. We all know this. Asia currently accounts for 3/4 of today's global coal consumption, and Asia is home to more than 3/4 of the coal plants planned or under construction, more than 1,200 new plants. As recently as 6 years ago, China was producing and using almost as much coal as the entire rest of the world. It is clear what's driving coal use. It is the need to provide electrical power to build a middle class and the industries to support it. Without plentiful, cheap energy, populations are consigned to reduced opportunity and the lower standards of living that come from those who lack electricity. No politician, no leader would forego the means of improving the quality of life for their country. Productivity, economic growth, communications, advanced healthcare, all are dependent one way or another on power. And this, so far, in this region, has meant coal production. So when it comes to poverty alleviation, as shown on this slide, and carbon emissions, there's a paradox. As poverty has dropped dramatically in East and South Asia since the 1980s, emissions have more than doubled. You can see poverty is on the right, but emissions are on the left. As the populations continue to grow, everyone contributes to climate change. It's not bad actors in terms of energy companies or automobile manufacturers. Anyone who uses electricity or books an airline flight or turns up the air conditioning or enjoys a meat-based diet is partially responsible for climate change because all of these things are contributors. There are several reasons why it's hard to address climate change on a large scale. First, human psychology, honed through thousands of years of evolution, responds to immediate dangers. A charging tiger, or a bus about to run us down on the street. Environmental threats like climate change and sea level rise are slow acting and apparently only over a long period of time. Absent immediate threats, it's hard for people to collectively demand change from governments or institutions, or to make change in their personal habits. Secondly, environmental issues are complicated. Carbon dioxide concentrations are small on an absolute scale. 400 parts per million means that CO2 is a tiny percentage of the entire atmosphere. Since carbon dioxide is naturally occurring and essential for plant life, it is easy to be confused about how these small concentrations can possibly have such a profound effect on global climate systems. And it's hard to implement widespread plans that need consensus agreement from large numbers of people regarding issues that are confusing, like this one. Third, we tend to put off dealing with long-term problems and prefer to work on immediate issues. It's the way we are. It's easy to depend on our ingenuity, our technical ability to design or engineer our way out of whatever problems the future may hold. This kind of faith in humanity is reinforced when we see the advances that technology has already provided us. Communications and computers, advanced medical tools, robotics that assist us in productivity, revolutions in food production that have done so much to alleviate hunger worldwide. And I think this is the fourth and most important reason that climate change is such a difficult problem to solve. Reducing carbon emissions challenges the collective belief in continuous economic expansion. Modern societies, like ours, are almost universally ascribed to the idea of constant growth as an essential component of a healthy economy and a prosperous future. Almost all metrics discussed by economics focus on growth, growth of trade, growth of business, growth of production and consumption. The gross national product is used as an assessment of a nation's success almost to the exclusion of every other measure, including quality of life or educational attainment. The fastest way to move populations out of poverty, as we have seen, is to provide economic opportunity. And all of us, not just our leaders, are understandably reluctant to abandon the conception that we can perpetually grow our economies. Increasingly, like governments, individuals are judging their success on the same terms. Personal wealth protects us from sudden sickness, poverty in our old age, and provides a better future for our children. But for too many of us, perpetual pursuit of wealth has become the sole focus of our lives. Additional wealth and greater consumption become our preoccupation. But here's another paradox. As the evidence grows that we are reaching our physical limits to growth, in the form of the cascading effects of climate change, it is impossible for each of us to have all we want. The resulting competition for resources means that some will inevitably use their wealth to ensure that they continue to benefit disproportionately from the engine of perpetual growth. The wealthy start to wall themselves off to protect themselves from the consequences of an environment out of balance. This happens both within societies, among the people that live in a society, and between countries as nations begin to fear migrants and competition from others. And thus, global inequity, the dragon that global economic expansion since 1950 has done so much to slay, is beginning to make a comeback. What can be done? Our collective past has some solutions to offer. In the middle of the 20th century in America, it was a time when great inequity was known across the country. The chart that we just saw showed the percentage of total wealth owned by the top 1%. And today, this inequity is greater than at the end of the 19th century. As you can see, this era for the end of the 19th century was known in America as the Gilded Age. To gild is to cover something with a thin coating, to disguise it. So instead of a true golden age, the late 19th century in America was gilded, seeming wealth, but wealth concentrated, excess among the privileged few, and great inequality. Today, we are seeing concentrated wealth return, a new Gilded Age. Yet some of the tools are available today that helped bring a close to America's Gilded Age. It was policies that favored the broad public interest ahead of private or corporate interests, such as guaranteed old age pensions, unemployment insurance, affordable quality education, and the start of publicly funded health care. These issues and solutions took generations to accomplish in America. But when the populations are afforded a degree of security independent of personal wealth, many are content to live with less, to get off the desire for perpetual growth, as they are secure in the knowledge that many of their needs of their families will be met by the larger society. It seems to me that a new generation of leadership will be the key to bringing about the necessary transformation to a more equitable and sustainable world. We know the technical solutions: transitioning to renewable energy, more efficient buildings, a shift to a lower carbon economy. The technical issues can be solved. But building national policies to bring greater economic equity and greater environmental quality requires the leadership of your generation. So I want to close by sharing some insights into what leadership qualities will be required and how to recognize them and how to build them in yourself. It strikes me that architects, all of you gathered here today and this week, are well prepared to be the leaders in this transformational effort. The education you are receiving and the work you will do as professionals provides training for successful leadership. The process of design always involves making decisions in uncertainty. At the start of a design, all you have is uncertainty. But as you learn and grow in your profession, you will be able to embrace it and use your gathered experience to move ahead confidently. Architects are forward-looking. They create a new future with every project. Architects are effective collaborators. Buildings are the great collective art form, involving the client, the consultants, community members, and partners of every kind. Architects are open communicators. The demands of fast-paced projects necessitate constant exchange. You can never keep information to yourself. You must always be resolved to share it so that you can fix mistakes when they inevitably are made and overcome setbacks when they happen, because they always do, by working in a team. Architects are systems thinkers. All aspects of the design support the aesthetic and programmatic vision. Architects must solve multiple problems at once to meet the needs of the client, to resolve the technical challenges, to support the community, and to satisfy the aesthetic vision. And finally, architects have the qualities of the heart needed to help solve today's most pressing problems. Architects are engaged, courageous, and empathetic to the needs of others. And they are humble. For, although it is a critical part of the solution, we know that architects, landscape architects, city planners, and urban designers alone will not solve our greatest challenges of global equity and sustainability in the coming years. And so, as we kick off the 61st Annual NASA Conference today, I urge you to be mindful of your responsibilities and your opportunities. You are entering a profession at a time of great challenge, as was just said. Never has the imperative of sustainable design and social equity been more critical, and never has the call for leadership been more important. It is up to your generation to address these issues, and the eyes of the world are on India to see how this great country will respond to the dual challenges of building a sustainable and equitable society in the world's largest democracy. Faculties and leaders who have put the conference together. I encourage you to engage with the presenters and to engage with each other and to enjoy your conference. This is your conference. Thank you very much and welcome.